Welcome to Sober Sunrise, a podcast bringing you AA speaker meetings with stories of experience, strength, and hope from around the world. We bring you several new speakers weekly, so be sure to subscribe. We hope to always remain an ad-free podcast, so if you'd like to help us remain self-supporting, please visit our website at sober-sunrise.com. Whether you join us in the morning or at night, there's nothing better than a sober sunrise. We hope that you enjoy today's speaker.
And we can see whether you're smiling or whether you're not. And so it's this is a treat before it gets too dark. And I agree with Chris, and I appreciate that. What's been really helpful for me is while these steps aren't necessarily separate, they do, one leads into the other, and it has been so important for me, as he said, not to let the inventory or the 8-step list be influenced by my fear or trepidation around the 9th step. Because the good news is, and I tell guys that I'm not going to make you do anything. I got no authority in AA, so don't be afraid to put something down that you're afraid that I'll see, because that's going to be your call. It's our call. We're volunteers in AA. So dude, don't hold yourself back, right? It's interesting that in A Vision for You, there's that conversation about that first meeting with Bill and Dr. Bob, right? And as it describes part of that in A Vision for You, Dr. Bob's buying in, right? He's getting this identification in a way that he didn't anticipate. This 15-minute conversation is turning into, a few hours. And but he at one point he pushes back, and says, but he didn't want to let the people know. He didn't want to risk his career and his family's well-being and his financial future by going and standing in front of his alcoholism in front of people. And as much as he's buying into everything Bill's saying, he said, I'll do anything but that. And that, of course, is when just a little bit later he went on that ill-fated trip to Atlantic City on the medical conference and went on his last debauch, right? He went on the bender of all benders and came back, right? And Bill takes him in. He's got to do that medical procedure after being hung over, and Bill gave him a goofball and a beer. Now, not many of us sponsors gave us our last goofball. We've been called a goofball, but not given one. But I think the person most grateful for that was the patient, because he wanted Bob to have a steady hand in this proctology exam he was given. So he said, I'll do anything, he said, but that. And what I have to be careful about is in AA is the anything but that I get out there, because that is what's going to get me. That's what I'm going to trip over. Chris read the line in there that says, reminding ourselves we're willing to go to any length. And what we're remembering, what we're being reminded of, is all the way back in how it works. It said, if you've decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. And a lot of us have decided we want what we think people in AA have, whether that is physical sobriety or whether that's the smiles and stuff we begin to see from people. But it's that going to any length part that we kind of trip over. I know a guy that when he is going through the book with somebody and they get to that, statement, and he poses it as a question. Have you decided you want what we have? Are you willing to go to any length to get it? Are you ready to take certain steps? And he says, let's sign and date this. And he says, because I'm going to have to remind you of this later. We're going to get over here and you're going to balk. I'm going, no, remember here on Tuesday the 23rd? You said, I'm all in.
That's good.
I was sponsoring a guy one time, and when I started sponsoring him, he lived in a gated community. He had a wife and young son. He was driving a Porsche. And after a year of my sponsorship, he had lost the house, he had lost the family, he had been to jail, and he was living in the Porsche. And that's what good sponsorship will do for you. And he went to jail yet again, and he got out and he called me. And he said, Steve, I'm ready, man. He said, it's not about the wife, it's not about the family. He says, I'm ready, I'll do anything. And I said, all right. I said, come on over. And he went, right now? I hung up on him, too. Right now? I'll do anything but that. And boy, these amends things look like, whoa, this could not possibly be a good idea. And we sometimes, I hear people say that there's nothing in AA that will hurt you. And I will tell you that sometimes it hurts. There's nothing AA's asked me to do that's not in my best interest. Sometimes when you go to the doctor and they're gonna, if you go to the dentist and they're gonna pull some teeth, they're gonna numb you first. When they give me the numbing shot, they go, this is gonna hurt a little bit. We gotta hurt you a little bit to get to the big problem. And so we can really address what's going on. When I'm making that list, as Chris also said, that my list hasn't been limited to the people that were on that 4-step inventory, because I hurt some people I had absolutely no resentment against. Some of the people I hurt the most were the people most compliant with me, that were most accommodating to me. But the 8-step in the 12 and 12 says, what do we mean by harms? And it says, in a practical way, we could define this as instincts in collision with others that cause spiritual, mental, physical, or emotional harm. Now, it's not lost on me that what I talked about earlier today in the 12th step is talking about my relationships with people, specifically in that particular case, a romantic relationship. But that I will want to have a relationship with you in the areas of physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional. So that's also the areas in which I am most likely to hurt people. Because that is how ultimately we all relate to each other in one or more of those ways. And I had given no thought to how I might have hurt people spiritually, mentally, or emotionally. You heard me mention that I totaled 6 automobiles. I think I mentioned that here last night. And had these multiple DUIs, and at 34 years old was the last DUI that I got that got me to treatment a year later. And but I was sitting in front of a lawyer that afternoon after getting that last DUI, and he said, Steve, do you think you got a problem with alcohol? I said, pal, what I think I got's a legal problem. I wish you would touch. And I said, that's why my mama wrote you the check. Right? So when I got sober, and when I get to this part, in my mind, I owe my mama the money for that check and others. But I had, when my daughter was 18 years old, maybe 19, she totaled her car out. Drunk. And I called my mom the next day and I said, Mom, Abby, wrecked her car last night. And my mother said, oh, I hope she's okay. Is everybody okay? I said, yeah, she's fine, Mom. I said, but the reason I'm calling you, this was 13 years after I got sober. I said, the reason I'm calling you is because I know we talked about that when I did that and I made amends. I says, but I want you to know today, I know how it felt. See, I paid the money. But I know what I did to people sometimes, but I don't always know what it did to them. I don't know the mental and emotional and spiritual harm that happened. And so it gave me another way to examine and explore these things. And it happens when it says in here that this is the beginning of one of those other lifetime things we go through. I think it means, number one, I'm always going to have a new amends to make somewhere down the line, and that'll fall in the 10th step maybe, where I don't care what number we put in front of it when we do it. But also I've made amends to the same person for the same event, but for different reasons more than once as my understanding of that grew. And I realized how it impacted them in ways that I had not considered. I hadn't ignored it, I just didn't see it. So, and I think Chris said that awareness grows over time. And so that's been critical. It says when we start on this, it says that in the moment, we're trying to put our lives in order. But our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and those about us. So on the one hand, I'm trying to clean stuff up. But if you look at everything we're doing in the steps, the end game is for me to be freer of me so I can be of some use to you, so I can serve God and my fellows. And I don't seem to be able to do that when those things are standing between me and you. So this is where, this 8th and 9th step is where I'm really kind of taking care of that last piece of business about me. I've done that self-examination. I have said I'm willing to change, and part of the demonstration of that willingness is to go out and try to set right, to the extent that I can, the harm I have done. To stand in front of it, and then what can I do to make it better? But I don't want to let my fear of going and standing in front of you stop me from putting you on my list. And I will tell a couple of amends stories and then give it back to Chris for him to talk about the 9th step a little bit too. But the couple of examples I have about that is that when I got sober, I'm a compulsive gambler as well. And they say gambling's really not my problem, but if you do it as poorly as I do it, it becomes a financial problem. I'm pretty sure if I were winning, nobody would have been complaining. But it also made me a liar, a cheat, and a thief. So gambling, I don't have any position on gambling, but just what it did to me and how I hurt others with that. And sober, I went on a gambling binge at 6 months sober, and I was out in Las Vegas on a work thing, and had to borrow a bunch of money to try to cover up this debt that I had run up at the casinos. And I came back and told the little group I was a part of, told my sponsor, but I wasn't telling Connie yet. I wasn't that sober. And I asked Frank, but I did ask him. I said, do I have to tell Connie? And he said, that'll be up to you, Steve. He says, I think that these steps. I said, let's look and see what it says. And we looked and we talked about it, and I said, thanks, I think I'll wait. And then I moved to Richmond, Virginia at a year sober. I got a new sponsor over there. Slate's clean. He doesn't know about this. You don't want to bog him down with old information. And it's now a year and a half later since I moved, and I'm loving being in AA. But this little pebble's turning into a boulder, you know. And I just couldn't shake it. And then finally I came into some money. My brother, I was working in a family business. I'm getting this bonus that Connie doesn't know about. And so I'm going to be able to pay this debt off. I'd had to get a post office box. It's before electronic banking, obviously. I'm renewing this 90-day note. I'm just doing all the kind of stuff we do to manage that, everything that comes with that. So finally I tell my sponsor, I sit down with him and I said, Joe, here's the deal. I said, this is what I did, longer story, but I said, now I've got this money, I'm going to pay it off. And I said, I had signed actually a contract with Connie. She had written a thing out that if I gambled again, she was going to leave me. And that's back when we thought signing a contract might mean something. And, that's a solemn oath, by the way. And I laid it out and I said, I haven't gambled in this year and a half, and she doesn't deserve to be hit with that. And I was putting into the accepting to do so would injure them or others category. And I was very eloquent in my defense of this and my concern for her. And I got done, and I said, what do you think? And he said, Steve, I think you're chicken shit. He said, I believe you believe everything you said. He said, in fact, I believe it's true. You don't want to hurt her. He says, but I think more than that, you're afraid to stand in front of the consequences of the truth. And he said, in AA, we don't quit making mistakes. We start standing in front of the mistakes we made. He says, I don't know whether she would leave you over that or not. He said, I don't. He said, you're going to do what you're going to do. But again, we just looked at what it said, and I went home and told her, and it was difficult. But but we're still together. I tell you, she has, she's got all the spiritual maturity in our family, I'll tell you. But I also told you, and this is where I want to show you the difference in the 8th and 9th step and why I think it's important to really do that 8th step. To not only make the list, but to acquire through prayer the willingness. Because the freedom's in the willingness. The freedom is when I'm no longer pushing back. I'll do it. I'm afraid, but I'll do it. And I told you about those infidelities that were in my marriage before I got sober. And my sponsor, Frank, and I went through that in my inventory, the first one I did, and we talked about it, and with prayer and his guidance, and not landing there easily, and not to protect myself, but that fell into the category. We determined would do more harm than good, would be hurtful to her, and so not to share it. But it was on my list. I was willing to do it, and we talked about what that would look like. We talked, in our book, gives us some direction about that type of an amends, what you don't do. What you do. You don't name other people. You don't bring other people into that. So we had this whole thing. 4 years later, Connie and I are sitting down having a conversation. It wasn't even an unpleasant conversation. And for the first time ever, she asked me, almost out of the blue, she says, have you ever been unfaithful in our marriage? And I'm telling you, I wasn't going to be able to put, I might be capable of the lie, just what, no, I wasn't going to be able to pull it off. My voice is going to go up 3 octaves. But honestly, intuitively, in that moment, I knew that the truth was called for. And see what I'm grateful, and we had that conversation. And again, all the credit to her for navigating through that. Because it hurt. It hurt, but she has never beat me back over the head with that. But the point for tonight's conversation was that having done that 8th step, having explored how that conversation might go, how my side of that conversation might go, was critically important. If I just said, no, I'm never going to deal with that, then in that moment, I wouldn't have known how to handle it. I wouldn't have known what to do. Maybe I would have done it, but done it more clumsily than I did it. Maybe I wouldn't have done it at all. What I know is it was the thing to do in that moment. And so that's why I think this 8th step is critical to do that, whether even in the moment, as Chris said, whether right now, that might be one of those I say I'm not ready to make yet, or it's not time to make it, that I want to step back from. So it says in here, some of us owe money, right? Check. Some of us have legal problems. Check. Some of us have domestic problems. Check. These are other areas of my life that I want to examine to see where there might be an amends that is owed. Then determine if it should be made now, or if that, it says in the 12 and 12 that the qualities someone needs to make an amends is a good judgment, a careful sense of timing, courage, and prudence. These are the qualities required. And what I would share with you is that when I'm the one in the barrel, I don't have those qualities. So I need those qualities, so I go to a sponsor who has those qualities. So that good judgment's probably not mine, particularly in the moment. That careful sense of timing, that courage, that prudence, I need to get that, so I ask God for power I don't have to do something I can't do. I talk to a sponsor and trusted confidants for their input and their experience about what they have done. And probably no step have I benefited more from the direction and shared experience of a sponsor than the 9th step. So, Chris.
Thanks, that was great. So another thing to watch out for with the 8th and especially the 9th step is this. If you want to find somebody who'll co-sign you as far as not having to do this amends, you'll find a lot of them in Alcoholics Anonymous. If you look for that, you will find people who will say, yeah, I don't make those kind of amends either. You know, I don't think you need to do that. You'll find those people. The real freedom, though, is in the actual making of the amends, the willingness in the making of the amends. So when you're looking for a sponsor or a spiritual advisor to give you guidance on specific amends, I recommend that you find someone with experience with these amends. And it's not 100% of the people in Alcoholics Anonymous have experience with this stuff. So just some amends stories of mine. How to approach the man we hated. Okay, I had an experience with this guy. I was about eight years sober, and I had an experience with this guy, and he was an Alcoholics Anonymous member. And he came at me pretty hard. There were some confidence that were broken. There was some stuff that he shared that really was inappropriate to share, and a number of other things. Now, this person is in my fellowship, right? He's in my core group, and I go ballistic. I come out of my aggression comes out of retirement for this, okay? And I'm talking to people about it, and I'm my sponsees, and there's like a team of people for all this crap. It was a monster nightmare. And one of the guys that I was sponsoring at that time said, they all had a lot of respect and they cared for me a lot. But this one guy told me the truth, and it was one of my sponsors. He said, "Chris, you're gonna need to set this right." Because he'd gone out and done a million amends. He's looking at me. You're going to need to make amends to him. And I'm like, if I could put the math together, 99% of the problems were this guy just coming at me. Okay, I don't know where it even came from, but there was 1% of me, like talking bad about him, talking about the situation, getting people to take my side. And I was mad when this guy told me this, right? I was mad when he told me that I was going to need to set this right. But it haunted me. Became willing, picked up the telephone, set an appointment, went and met this guy, and you could argue that 99% of the blame was his, but that's not what I'm supposed to do in this step. Putting the wrongs that he has done aside, I resolutely take the bit in my teeth and go to him, expressing my former ill feeling. And I did that, and it was not an easy amends. I really tried to do my job, and I probably would do a better job today, but I did a good enough job. And after the amends, I felt like washing my mouth out with gasoline for doing it. But I want to tell you what happened. From that moment forth, there was no power in what this guy had said or done. I was free of it. It didn't matter. There was a release that was incredible for doing this. There was a release, and once more I was shown that I was wrong and AA was right. I knew this amends would go wrong, and this is not the right thing to do. And once more, Alcoholics Anonymous showed me these spiritual principles work. And to this day, listen, we're not best friends. But I did an event with them up in Boston not long ago. And we're okay. We'll have coffee together, and all that stuff is water over the dam. Most alcoholics owe money. All right. I wasn't really bad with money. I've sponsored people who come in like $1 million in debt. I was more of a small time operator, but there was one amends that I needed to do, and it had to do with some crazy days in Florida. I lived in Florida for about 5 years. I went down there to go to a university. A friend of mine called me up one day and said, "Oh man, this is a great university. There's a bar in every building, and this is where all the drugs come through. We get them cut rate." And I'm like, the next day I got an application in the mail. I didn't even know what the school taught, and I'm on my way down there, and I really applied myself the 5 years I was there, and I came away with a solid 6 credits. Over those 5 years. Solid. I'm very, very proud of that. Now what happened was it was some of the worst years of my life because it was just unchained Chris, right? And I remember we were renting a house. Me, a Quaalude dealer, and another alcoholic on unemployment, and we were renting this house together, and we got thrown out because we were having loud parties till like 4 a.m. And this one time, the landlord calls up and says, "This time you guys are really going to have to go." And we got really drunk, and we had a house trashing party. Has anybody ever had a house trashing party? It's when you kick in every wallboard, you break every window. I even got up on the roof and kicked the chimney off the house. Any chimney off the house kickers here? Welcome. It was one of those cheap Florida chimneys.
That's a specialty.
And I mean, we took all the doors off and made a bonfire in the backyard. I mean, we made this place permanently uninhabitable. And then we left like 3 weeks early. So I hadn't even thought about this until I got sober. And then it comes into my consciousness that, I got to take care of some stuff in Florida. And then I start to get letters from Florida. What had happened was I'd gotten a DUI. I'd blown off the court date. There was community service I was supposed to do, all these ambulance bills, because I was one of those guys that, ended up in the ambulance every once in a while for one reason or another. There was all kinds of real legal troubles, and it was really piling up on me down there. And I did what some of us do. I thought, I think Mom needs some help around the house back up in New Jersey. I think I'll help her out, and I'll go up there and paint the house. And I went up there and moved in for 8 years. And I start to get this mail because the computers start to come online, right? So I have to take care of all this stuff, and I spent a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of effort setting these things right. And sometimes when it's it's criminal, you got an extra motivation to get it over with and get past it and get the paper off your back. But there were just a number of those amends. I told you about I wasn't a big thief or anything, and I wasn't the kind of guy who'd borrow a lot of money, and I didn't have any credit cards, but the money that I owed, I ended up paying back. The domestic trouble, my wife that followed me down to Florida, and within a year and a half was out of there. You know what I mean? We got married, and then we got divorced, I think, in about a 12-month period of time. She took my daughter, she took my dog, and she took my car, and never came back. And so for the longest time, I had a huge resentment about her. I can remember sitting at the bar with a triple bourbon. She left me when I needed her the most. Those women, and if you would have asked me what my thoughts about women were the day I showed up in Alcoholics Anonymous, I would have said this: you can't trust them. They're all crazy, and their need bags. I mean, I would have had this whole list, and I would have painted all you women with that same brush, right? Because that was my experience. I start doing these inventories, and I start to see that they'd have been crazy to stay with me, and really the problem in the whole situation was toxic proximity to me is what really caused all the problems in these relationships. You can't act like I did and have everything work out fine. And so I went out to Colorado. I made amends to my ex-wife. There was just a whole bunch of them, and there's a continuing process to these amends. I want to share just a couple of current ones, at least one current one, and then I'll hand it back to Steve. I had this buddy from about 2000 to about 2010. We were running buddies in Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay, we were road dogs together. Every crazy thing that I got involved with, I would bring this guy along. We were tight. It was like family. And you'll have these type of friendships in Alcoholics Anonymous. They feel closer to you sometimes than family. Some of these friendships. And all of a sudden, there's some distance that starts to happen. All of a sudden, he's not returning my phone calls. Okay? He's real nice to me, when I see him at a meeting or something. It doesn't feel like there's anything wrong, but there's a distance. We're not getting together anymore. We're not doing holidays together like we used to. We're not running around. And and this goes on about 5-6 years, maybe longer, maybe 7 or 8 years, and I feel a loss of it. It was just one of those friendships. I feel a loss. We were really close. You know what I mean? I feel a loss, and I'm putting a 10-step together this one time, and I get this intuitive thought. And the intuitive thought is this: make an appointment and make an amends. I wasn't conscious of any amends that needed to be made. I really wasn't. But this separation it felt wrong to me. So I did that. He met me at a Dunkin' Donuts and we sat down. And, I started off by basically saying, I just don't feel like, things are going real well with us. And I want to ask you, and I want you to be honest with me, is there anything you need to talk about me with? Is there any harms that I've caused? Because I'm really not aware of any. And he said, yeah, there's a harm. He said the Tuesday night meeting, you took it over with a whole new bunch of people. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What had happened is the Tuesday night Burnsville meeting had shrunk. We'd moved away and it had gotten really small. And it was him and 2 or 3 people. And a new group of people moved in to the meeting. They saw that this is a great place to meet. There's really nobody showing up there anymore. They went and they talked to the minister of the church, saying that meeting's over. We'd like to move our meeting. They're getting kicked out, not too far away, and they want to move their meeting into this church. And the minister said, fine. So one day, all of a sudden, they show up. And I'm like, I didn't have anything to do with that. And he goes, what? I go, that wasn't me. I wasn't going to either one of those meetings. So it was a misunderstanding that had separated this really tight friendship for like 8 years. So there's something to be said about the principle, seeing in the principle of this step, being current with people. My spiritual lineage, they would do this. every once in a while they would just sit with somebody and make sure that they're current. You know, is there anything that we need to talk about? And we're back friends now. You know what I mean? We talk to each other. It's like nothing ever happened. And it was a misunderstanding. You know, it's some places. I'm sober a long time now, and yet I still have this capacity to not look under certain rocks. And one of the things that I needed to do for a long, long time was to sit with my wife Andrea and get really current with her and put together a list of ways I've fallen short and sit with her and talk with her about it. And the crazy thing is I didn't think I needed to do that, you know, because we're married and we talk all the time and we're together, we sleep in the same bed. You know, do I really need to do that? And I found out by doing it, yes, I really needed to do it. You know, because things really, really changed in a positive way after that. I was as honest as I possibly could be about the ways that I was falling short in the time that we were married, and she really appreciated it. You know, so this amends thing, it's a way of life. You know, I want to see it as an exercise, that where I'll do the exercise, and you know, I'll muscle through it. You know, I'll be done, and everything will be fine, and I'll move on. But I've found that the way I really need to live is I need to be responsible for my behavior. I need to be responsible for it. And I don't want things to go unaddressed. I don't want the ways I've fallen short that could have harmed you. I don't want that to go unaddressed. And the thing I've gotten back from these amends is an enormous amount of power, an enormous amount of spiritual power, and an enormous amount of freedom, an enormous amount of spiritual freedom. I really do feel like I can go any place on this earth at any time without having to worry about anything. And I feel that I've got a renewed ability to do a lot of these things. And I know it comes from the spiritual work. It does not come from me just trying to fix things myself. It comes from actually taking the action and then getting the results back. Every single action step in this book has a series of unbelievable promises. Are these extravagant promises? Yes! They are! For somebody like me, you know? And so, you know, I'm really grateful to be here tonight. I'll pass it back to you, Steve.
Thanks, Chris. You know, that last thing you were talking about in making that amends to Andrea, I was at an event like this in New York 3 years ago, a men's retreat. And we were having this 8th and 9th step discussion, and I was talking about the fact, and my wife had shared with me over the years that that there were times, and I guess it's maybe, I think the term today most often used as gaslighting, right? But that I was gaslighting her long before I knew what it meant, basically to protect myself, but I would convince her that what she saw that was and thought and heard that was absolutely true wasn't accurate. And I would spin it in such a way to make her doubt herself. I tell you, when my daughter was really young, when my daughter was like 3, you know, I would come in from work. First thing I would do was go upstairs and smoke a joint and have a drink. And then I would come back down where she was, and maybe, you know, it was about bedtime for her then at that age. And she would say, my wife and I didn't smoke at that time, and she would say, "Daddy, you smell like smoke." And I would go, "No, I don't." and not even thinking that I'm already, like, it's like telling her that a cow is a horse. that at 3 years old I'm telling her, don't trust your instincts, don't trust yourself. And I'm now doing that with my wife when she was an adult. And we'd had that conversation. I mean, she told me about it, and I kind of nodded like I got it. But I'm out having this conversation and began to talk to these men about it. And I can't tell you how many came up later and talked about having a similar experience doing that. It just seems to be kind of not an uncommon thing. And I realized I had acknowledged it, but I had never really owned it with my wife. And I got home that Sunday afternoon, and I went back to our bedroom. She was in the bedroom, and I said, I need to talk to you. And we had that conversation. I said, I get it, man. And when she said it was maybe one of the most satisfying experiences, one of the most intimate conversations we've had. And but I blow by those opportunities all the time. Sometimes not even purposely, just not aware, spiritually asleep. This is, Chris talked about that at the end of that chapter, after, just before the promises, there's a line that we hear quoted, or a version of it quoted in a lot of AA meetings. The line here says, as God's people, we stand on our own feet. We don't crawl before anyone. Well, we sit in meetings and claim that independence, right? As God's people, we don't crawl before anyone. But the preceding sentence doesn't get nearly as much press. The preceding sentence says, we are kind, considerate, tactful, and humble without being servile or scraping. In other words, when I go make these amends, even to the guy that I hate, even to the guy that he's 99% and I'm 1%, that I want to take an attitude of kindness and courtesy and humility and consideration into that. Now, I'm not servile or scraping. I don't have to hang my head. I don't have to shuffle my feet. But it's not in some pound my chest way. It is just, how can I just go take this head on, straight on, and do this? It's not lost on me that it's in this part of the book, in the 8th and 9th step, where another line that we reference all the time is plucked from, but sometimes I don't put it in the context of where it is in the steps. And it says the spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. This is where this is the first time in my recovery that beyond the sponsor, I'm going out in front of other people. This is when we're taking what has been this inside baseball, right? We're playing at the meetings all week, can't wait to get to a meeting to tell you about me. But now I'm going outside the room. Now I'm going out and to those people who won't necessarily understand, who aren't gathered to help pat me on the back and say you're a winner and keep coming back, Now I'm going and I'm going to stand in front of this stuff. And so the spiritual life's not a theory. We have to live it. That faith without works is dead. And that's where we go with this there. I'm going to use the next 10 minutes that we've got to talk about the 10th step, and then Chris will pick the 10th step up in the morning when we start, so we can try to touch all the bases. But I will tell you, this is again my feeling, and I think it's steps 9, 10, 11, and 12. As I look at them now, actually start simultaneously. Now they almost can't do that exactly, because particularly when we're going through the steps and we're trying to, navigate with a sponsor through there. But this says after the promises, after those extravagant promises that Chris talked about, and with the last line being they will always materialize if we work for them, this thought brings us to step 10. The thought being that this will materialize if I work for them, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes. As we go along, we vigorously commence this way of living as we cleaned up the past. So as I'm going through this, as I'm getting started with my 9th step, I want to clean up any new mistakes. If I'm at home and I'm cleaning up a big mess in the den, and I kick over an ashtray or a glass of tea while I'm cleaning up the big mess, I don't go, well, I'll get to that in a few months. No, I clean it up as I go along. And so, because I can make a new mistake on the way home from my first amends, you know, that will require, in fact, sometimes my first amends is in itself a mistake that needs some cleaning up. But so we start this as we commence cleaning up the past. And now it tells me that this is the continue step, right? And there's always, we can, you know, my sponsor today, Don M. in Louisville, Don's a guy who comes from his sponsorship lineage. That Don were here, he would tell you that it is his belief and his experience that you work the first 9 steps once, and then you live in steps 10, 11, and 12. But to live in steps 10, 11, and 12, you have to be working the first 9 steps. So it is a distinction without a difference to me. I don't get caught up in it. When you hear somebody say in a meeting that that they're doing another 4th step, well, I don't care if it's a 4th step or a 10th step. Again, I don't care what number is in front of the action I'm taking if I'm taking the right action. I want to have an experience. I'm not a numerologist, right? I'm looking for a spiritual experience. And so I don't get too hung up on that stuff, but I do know that I'm continuing to take personal inventory. And it says that now that I have taken these first 9 steps, or I'm engaged, I've taken the first 8 and I'm engaged in this 9th step and beginning this 10th step. As Chris says, I am current as I can be. Well, now what's my function? Now what am I supposed to do? Well, my next function, it says, is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. I've been getting rid of all of that stuff that's in my way to now. Let me grow in understanding and effectiveness. And love and tolerance of others is my code. So now I've got a call to action, I've got a function, and I've got a code to live by. Love and tolerance of others. And what I've discovered, for me anyway, is that those are inextricably tied together. This growing in understanding and effectiveness and love and tolerance. I cannot be very understanding and effective if I'm not loving and tolerant. And if I'm not loving and tolerant, I can't be very effective in understanding. They seem to be interdependent upon one another. And this tolerance has taken a change for me on what that means. There's a guy who's over now, in fact, a guy named Steve A. He passed away this last week. But Steve had given me this little card years ago that had a description or definition of tolerance that I had not seen before. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but because I tend to view tolerance as I'll tolerate you, right? I'll sit here and just know what a jackass you are, but I won't say it out loud, and we'll just sit here. But this described tolerance as a generosity and bigness of spirit, allowing others their particular point of view and peculiarities. Now, my favorite word there is the peculiarities. Yeah. He's not a jackass, he's peculiar. It's a gentler word. He's just peculiar. I'm pretty peculiar. And this love and tolerance then begins not me having that harsh judgment I tend to have. I still have to assess things. Cliff Roach said years ago, he said, we say in AA that we don't judge people. He said, we judge, but we don't condemn. We make assessments, but we don't shoot our wounded. We don't kick you out of the club. If you can't screw up in AA, where can you screw up? If I can't make a mistake here and try to learn and grow by that mistake, then I'm out of places to go. We already said it was the last house on the block. So this 10th step has me arrive here, and then it says, and I alluded to it either earlier today or yesterday, it talks about the fact that by now, so arriving at this place, I will be sane as it pertains to alcohol. And so now this is where typically in my experience is that I'm not resisting a drink. Because when I first got to AA, I don't know about you guys, I thought we were going to spend a lot of time not drinking in AA. I thought not drinking was an actual activity in Alcoholics Anonymous. We'll just get together and not drink. You know, would you look at him not drink over there? Look at the technique on that guy. And he reached for it and pulled back. And that's what we do. We get together and talk each other out of a drink. And I'd be resisting this drink. And I'm going to do it because I'm in. I know I need to not drink. But it's going to be a pretty pitiful life. It's going to be all about where I can't go, what I can't do, who I can't hang out with. You know, got to say, hey, Steve, man, we're going to go on a ball game, going to go to the game on Sunday. You want to go? And I go, boy, I would love to go, but I am busy on Sunday. I will be home not drinking. And you know, and somebody said don't drink even if your ass falls off, right? So I'll be home not drinking, guarding my ass. The thing is, I believe that because there is a little bit of not drinking early on in AA. You know, a day at a time. What a pitiful, you know, call to action that sounded like. Can you just not drink today? Can you gut it out? And so we don't drink a day at a time, and that's kind of the way it starts for some of us. But what happens over time is that becomes, I live a day at a time. I get to live in this day. I'm not fighting something off. And it says the problem will have been removed with no thought or action on our part. As I said, that thought or action is through the steps trying to connect to this power. Then it says, and we get the reminder that we all need, you know, hey, it's a daily reprieve, contingent on the maintenance of the spiritual condition. And my sponsor would make a distinction between my spiritual condition and my maintenance on it. You know, I can be working on the car. I might not be very good at it. It might not be in good running condition, but if I'm working on the car, I probably can't get into any trouble doing anything else. So if I am working on that spiritual condition through prayer, meditation, going to meetings, being sponsored, sponsoring people, working with others, taking a service commitment, being in the third legacy, if I've got some combination of those things going on, I might be in good stead to get through this day without it feeling like I'm not drinking. Because 32 years later, AA would be a tough place to do time. It'd be a tough place just to try to not drink. But man, those of us, most of the people here, been around a while, you know that's not why we're here. That's not the experience we're having. We're in this 10th step where the problem has been removed in a 24-hour cycle contingent upon the maintenance of my spiritual condition. And it says, every day is a day where I must carry the vision of God's will into all my activities. That selfish self-centeredness, Chris even talked about it earlier today, where I am viewing everything through the prism of self. How does this affect me? Now it says I'm looking through God's eyes. Every day is a day on the vision of God's will for me. Not what should I do here, what would God have me do? And that's a big, too big for me. I mean, I'm not getting direct messages from God, but I'll tell you how I handled that in AA. I took an inventory, a non-AA inventory one time. I mean, the AA guy wrote it, but it wasn't, if we stay sober about 10 years, we all got a book in us, right? That improves on the one that we use day to day. And this guy had written, and one, the first page on this inventory where I was in the state says, what do you think about your marriage? And I wrote some stuff down, honestly, wrote it down. Turned the page, the next page went, no, really, what do you think about your marriage? And there was some more stuff because it made me think about it in a different way. And then I turned the page and said, what would God think about your marriage? Well, when I'm looking for direction from God, and we'll move into that 11th step as well, right? But when I'm trying to figure out what to do, when I'm trying to use every day as a day when I must carry the vision of God's will, what's God's will for me, into all my activities, kind of big for me to try to figure out. But what I have decided is that God is not handicapped by my human frailty. So God would not do or not do anything because he's afraid or she's afraid. God would not do or not do anything out of lust, out of greed, out of fear, out of any of those 7 deadly sins, out of those things that hold me bondage. God is not bound by those things like I am. So God wouldn't, so what would I do if I weren't limited by those human qualities? And it gives me a better picture. And it says that I will take, and we'll talk about it in the 12th step tomorrow, right? Practicing these principles in all our affairs. The last thing I'll say, I got 2 minutes. I'll be brief and I'll end with this. That it says, because this has always been an important one for me in the 10th step, right after that spiritual axiom thing that I talked about earlier today. But it says, what about justifiable anger? Isn't there some justifiable anger? And the book doesn't say that there's not some things that justify anger that wouldn't be justified. It just says that I should leave it to those more equipped to handle it. And that's the same advice you give me about alcohol. I can take a drink. It's legal. I'm grown. But you guys have said I probably should leave alcohol to those better equipped to handle it. And that for me, anger is poison. I got a right to be angry, but I don't have to be. And it also says that no people are probably worse at identifying and discerning between justifiable and unjustifiable anger. So I'm also not good at that. And so that's where, this anger and it's just like I was saying earlier today in that inventory, the resentment inventory. I keep wanting to adjudicate the facts. I keep wanting to prosecute the case rather than be free of the anger. And today, the choice I've made is I prefer to be free of the anger rather than be right. We all say it flippantly a lot. You want to be right or you want to be happy. And of course, most of us think being right would make me happy. And really, it's not even that. A guy told me, he said, Steve, he says, I have a problem, having to be right all the time. I said, I don't believe you, man. He said, yeah. He said, I just have to be right. And I said, no. I said, I just don't think that's the problem. I said, because you're right the moment you're right. You're right if you're right. So it's not your need to be right that's your problem. It's the need for everybody else to know you're right that's your problem. So see, if I'm right, I'm right. But I need you to know I'm right. I need to sway the jury. I need you to acknowledge, hopefully, in a large enough crowd of people, perhaps media, that I'm right. So this 10th step gives me even more personal freedom from self than I've had. 8:45, I hit it on the button. We're done. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Malcolm. I really want to thank Berta and Meryl and all the people that help out at the Wilson House. It really was a great weekend. For anybody that hasn't been there, it really is, it's a destination type of retreat or workshop. And Malcolm, thank you so much for organizing everything. There was so many moving parts. And you just did a great job. And Steve, what a pleasure it was doing this workshop with you. That it was really an outstanding thing for me to have been a part of. So on Saturday night, Steve started to touch a little bit on step 10, and just quick review. We've fully conceded to ourselves that we're alcoholic and everything that means. We've come to believe that there's a power that can solve this problem and move us forward into some type of emotional, physical, and mental health. We've made a decision to engage in whatever this Alcoholics Anonymous thing is going to look like. Place ourselves unreservedly under the care and protection of God and wisdom in Alcoholics Anonymous. We make an inventory of the manifestations of self, the major manifestations of self that really have defeated us, our grosser handicaps. we share that. We share that with a sponsor, a spiritual advisor. Some people use priests. There's a lot of latitude in that. I prefer, doing it with a sponsor, but that's not absolutely essential. But we share it as honestly as we can, holding nothing back. And then we take a look at the concepts of step 6 and step 7. We're moving into a relationship, a working relationship with God. As we're doing this, if we've been doing our job, we're becoming aware and we're becoming awake to the fact that there's a power. There's a power that we're starting to really get in touch with. And we look at step 6 and step 7, and we realize that these handicaps, these difficulties that we've discovered in the 4th step and anywhere else where we discover them, they're really going to be too large for us to just whittle away ourselves. We're working on this relationship with God, and we become willing to have the character defects that we really find objectionable. We become willing to have those removed, and then we say a prayer for God to take all the good and the bad. Steve said on Saturday night, good and bad. Listen, I didn't know the difference between good and bad. The things that I thought were good when I came into AA ended up being bad, and the things that I thought were bad ended up being good. So I'm a really bad judge of good and bad. So God, take all of this stuff. Give me the power. Give me the direction. Help me grow in effectiveness and grow in understanding and grow in relationship with you, and fit me to be of service to my fellows, because it's dawning on me by step 7 that this whole thing is about creating a new Chris who is not just interested in his own plans and designs and how things impact him, but this new Chris is now all of a sudden starting to pay attention to the other people out there in the world. and there's an awakening to the fact that I need to help where I can, and I need to be of service where I can. And then we look at steps 8 and 9. A lot of damage in the past. Some of us have more damage than others, but it's absolutely essential, I believe, to make an effort to try to set right the wrongs. It's incumbent to become free. I need to be conscious of the fact that I've done what I could to set right the damage in the past. So, I put a list together. I become willing to make these amends, and I actually go out and I start making them. And by this time, a wholesale transformation is underway. In my personality, in my behavior, in my belief systems. It's a fundamental, change in perspective, and an abundant amount of power is flowing in, the spiritual power that enables me to do the things that I couldn't just do on my own self-centered, self-aware, perspective. I'm all of a sudden, speaking and doing all this crazy stuff, that I never would have felt comfortable doing before. So there's this power that's coming in, and I'm starting to understand a little bit about freedom too. Being free of the shame, the guilt, the remorse of the past. As I start to clean it up, I become free of the emotional attachment to that past, that painful past. And then we move into step 10. This thought brings us to step 10. What thought? The thought of the promises, the 9-step promises, they're amazing promises.
one of my favorite is, I can be alone at perfect peace and ease. What a great promise. There are periods of time in my life where I don't know about anybody else, but one of my favorite things to do in between all this service and working and family, you know what I like to do? Nothing. That's what I like to do. I like to do nothing. Just be alone at perfect peace and ease, and just be in like a meditative state, sitting on the couch. And my wife will come in and she'll go, "What are you doing?" I'll be like, "Nothing." "What do you mean nothing?" But it's one of my favorite promises. So the concepts of these promises, bring us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. If all you do is highlight the instructions in step 10 and step 11, it's not a huge, heavy lift. This is really stuff that any of us can do. Now, another thing, I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. One of the things I've really been discovering in this year, and because this big book really is alive for somebody like me, I gain new perspective every time I go through it. I learn more about it every year, every month that goes by, and I'm still in awe of just the quality of this writing and the impact that this can have on the alcoholic, the solution to alcoholism. But what I'm really seeing these days is I'm seeing the mystical qualities of Bill's writing more and more and more. We've entered the world of the spirit is in here. Yeah, that's a pretty mystical statement. Like this is deep stuff that can be accessed by anyone who's willing to take the action that sets it up. And it's amazing to me. We vigorously commenced this way of living as we cleaned up the past. So it's giving us some instruction. We've entered the world of the spirit. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. It should continue for our lifetime. And then there's some watchwords. And these go all the way back to like step 3 information on page 60 to 62, right? It says continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. Those are the major manifestations of the self that had defeated me. And so the self doesn't get completely eradicated. We have to be aware of the manifestations of self. We need to recognize them as such, and then we need to take action. And the action it says we take is when these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. We discuss them with someone immediately and make amends quickly if we've harmed anyone. That's all previous step work, the step exercises that we've done. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Love and tolerance of others is our code. It even stretches a little bit into step 12. The Oxford group, the Oxford group, way back when, they understood that sometimes you could get somebody in and you could evangelize the hell out of them. And they were soapbox standing, come to Jesus people like crazy. And a year later, they'd burned out. They'd found other things to do with their time. And so they concentrated on a concept known as continuance. And this was an Oxford group principle, continuance. I talk to, when I'm talking to my sponsees, I emphasize over and over and over again, consistency in meeting, steps, service, and sponsorship. Consistency in those 4 areas, an equal sign to recovered, permanently. If there's permanent consistency, there's permanent recovery in these principles and these steps. So, love and tolerance of others are our code, and we've ceased fighting anything or anyone. Now, when I first read that, I was like, you've got to be kidding. What about my neighbor? What about at work? I'm not going to let him step on me. I had all these reasons why. What about the contentious group conscience where you got to stand up? How do you not fight anything or anyone? And I've got to tell you, I'm at a point today where I can honestly say to you, I don't fight anyone or anything. Maybe I disagree. Maybe I've got another perspective, but I'm not engaged in the fight anymore. You know what I mean? Now here's a good one, especially for the new people. For by this time, sanity will have returned. And then there's a whole series of alcohol promises. The promises that we're going to remain separated safely from alcohol. There's probably 10 of them. And again, people that relapse, I have a feeling for the most part, the relapse occurs because they haven't taken the action to get up to this step. I think I'm gonna bounce it over to Steve now because I have on Zoom I can keep talking, so I'm gonna be conscious of that and hand it over to Steve.
Thanks, Chris. Good evening, everyone. Steve Lee, alcoholic. Yeah. I don't suffer from the same self-restraint that Chris does, but I will do my best. And I want to start also by saying what a great time I had this past weekend, and sorry we had to cut it short, but so great to spend time with you guys and so great to spend it at the Wilson House. Bertha, thank you and your crew for being such wonderful hosts. I'm really grateful for that. And I'm going to say a couple of things that wrap up on step 10 because it just made me think about it as Chris was talking. And one of those is the point he made that as we get here to the 10th step, it says, because we are current, not through with the steps, but we're current in our efforts in applying those and beginning those amends and being current. It says, I've entered the world of the Spirit. But I've entered the world of the Spirit in the same way that I enter the foyer of your home. I am barely in, I've just stepped in. And doing 10, 11, and 12 and adding the prayer and meditation and working with others and practicing these principles in all my affairs gives me access to the rest of the spiritual house, And I want to go deeper and deeper in and sit down and make myself at home. And to cease fighting anything and anyone, it says here that we continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. And I will tell you, when I showed up here at step 10 the first time, I was absolutely honed in on looking for that resentment, dishonesty, and fear. I was just looking at it in you rather than in me. I was noticing it still in the folks around me, and I didn't realize that this is really where I want to hold that mirror up. And if I am looking for those things in myself, and not in a self-obsessive way, not in a beat myself up way, not in a be a harsh judge of myself way, but just in the way that I look in the mirror before I leave the house in the morning. I get dressed, and I will tell you, you can't tell it when you run into me during the day, but at some point that morning, I looked in the mirror, checked my outfit out, and said, all right, this will work. I'm taking this out today. This is the package. And sometimes I forget to look closely enough in that mirror to see that I've got a blemish on my shirt or a tear in my slacks, and so all through the day, and I know you guys do this because I know many of the people on here are as, self-centered as I might tend to be, that several times during the day, if you walk by a mirror, you're for sure taking a glance and seeing how you're holding up during the day. And actually, if you're walking down the street, you're liable to look into a window to catch your reflection just to see if this package looks as good as it did when I left this morning. And that's a little bit of what that 10th step is our version of taking that spiritual look at ourselves, you know. And that's particularly true as I begin to full step 11 into this, and I'm preparing myself for my day. I'm getting grounded and connected with God and with me, so I can go out and be useful to you. But that can wear off pretty quick. And so I need to check in the spiritual mirror several times a day to see if I was going to say to see if my hair was still neatly combed, but that hasn't been an issue for quite a while. So it's just, that's kind of that spot check inventory that the 10th step talks about, right? And, so I just kind of wanted to touch base on that. And then when I'm transitioning, and as I said Saturday, it is my belief now, I mean, in essence, we begin steps 10, 11, and actually steps 9, 10, 11, and 12 kind of all at the same time. Now, it's kind of hard to do all of those same things in one motion, but I don't wait till I'm done making amends to begin cleaning up my new mistake. It says I do that as I go about cleaning up the past. And I certainly don't wait until I'm done with my amends before I begin to embrace and embark upon that prayer and meditation, that effort to become closer and grow that conscious contact with God. So these things kind of begin at the same time, right? But the transition as I'm transitioning from 10 to 11, the book says that we have carefully followed directions. We've begun to sense the flow of His Spirit into us. So obviously, when I enter the world of the Spirit, I begin to sense the flow of His will into me, and it says I begin to develop this vital sixth sense. So I've got the normal five senses, our human senses of touch, taste, smell, sight, and hearing. Now, I got to tell you, at my age, about 3 of those is pretty significantly diminished. But I've still got them. But now I'm getting this vital sixth sense, which is a spiritual sense. We talked earlier in the book about the fourth dimension. And when I'm in that fourth dimension, that's when I've entered the spiritual world. That's the spiritual dimension that's added to the 3-dimensional world that I'm living in of height, width, and depth. Now we've added the spiritual component. So I got 4 dimensions in play, and I've got 6 senses in play. Man, I'm armed and dangerous now, right? I am ready to be out in the world in a new way. I have more at my disposal. It radically changes my experience of you, my experience of me, my experience of the world at large. I am seeing things differently. I'm feeling things differently. I have access to things that I did not have access to. They're there. And I got to tell you, as I mentioned the other day, that I'm in and out of that 4th dimension, and I am off and on with my access to that 6th sense because self shows back up. And the book will tell me as I'm engaged in this 11th step that I remind myself, and self, by the way, is my ego, my mind. I remind myself many times each day, thy will not mine be done. I have to check in the spiritual mirror to see if I'm still connected, or have I begun to run the show again? Because in fact, that happens so subtly that I don't even always recognize that it's happened. that's what this self-examination is about. I'm encouraged to take a quick peek many times during the day, and at the end of the day, I've given a review to kind of see how I'm doing in that. So to check myself again before I call it a night. And, but I want to stop and tell a couple of stories that many of you on here who I've spent time with before have heard me tell, but they're the only stories I got. I can make some stuff up, and I'm prone to, but, this one's true. And, cause you heard me talk earlier in the weekend, those of you who were there, was my resistance initially to, the idea of a higher power, to the idea of God, to the idea that I might access this higher power, whether there is such a thing or not. I certainly didn't feel like I had access to it. And this 11th step is encouraging me to seek through prayer and meditation to improve upon, to build upon, to initiate this conscious contact. See, this consciousness, I'm walking around spiritually asleep most of the time. And this is telling me, no, let's make a conscious contact, an awareness of this power. Not only have you stepped in to the foyer of the spiritual house, but be aware that you're there. Stop, look around, take it in, and then build upon that. And, yet I was uncomfortable with all aspects of prayer and meditation and even the language. And again, I won't revisit all that. I talked about it, but at about 12 years sober, I began to use a phrase, regularly that said I was struggling with meditation. And we often hear people talk about that, and it's certainly not universal, but many of us will say that meditation is perhaps a little different for us than prayer. We seem to embrace the prayer aspect of things sometimes a little more quickly than we do meditation. Again, that's not universal, but that certainly was true of me. And, I was talking to my friend Danny B., who lives in Houston, Texas, or just outside of Houston in Spring, Texas, that some of you know. And I'm telling Danny about this, and I was going to an AA conference that Howard Poland's was going to be at, and Howard was a devoted practitioner of meditation. And Danny said, you need to go talk to Howard when you get there and talk to Howard about your struggle with meditation. So I get out there. It was in Oregon. I go up to Howard and I said, Howard, I'm struggling with meditation. Now, if you know Howard, you can imagine how excited that made him, because he went, oh, Steve. He rubbed his hands together like a praying mantis. He went, oh, Steve. He said, let's go to my room. So we head off to his hotel room, and he said, well, what are you doing now? And I said, well, Howard, I'm really not doing anything now. And he just cackled. He went, oh, I see, your problem's not technique, it's commitment. You're not struggling with meditation. You're not meditating. He said, are you willing to struggle? He said, because what you're saying, you're not meditating and having a problem with that. Willingness is your problem. Discipline is your problem. Commitment is your problem. He said, are you willing to create a space and time where you can struggle with meditation? And, he says, cause that's what it's going to take. He said, then you'll figure out what happens in that space and time will evolve. You get to do, it says here in step 11 that it's an individual adventure, right? When we talked earlier in the book where it said that each of us in our own language and from our own point of view talks about how he established a relationship with God, it says there may be a wide variation in the way each of us conceives of and approaches that power. So my approach, I tend to think of my approach as my approach to prayer and meditation. That's how I'm trying to get close to this higher power. And so some of us will take that quiet time and light some sage or incense and chant, and some of us will do guided meditations, and some of us will just do some contemplative meditation. It just doesn't matter. AA doesn't care. In fact, I'm encouraged. It says our libraries are a treasure trove. And now we would say Google is a treasure trove of information for us to seek. And I've done a million different things because I don't do any of them well. So I just try them all. And I do believe that I am served well by the effort at least as much, and by the commitment and by the discipline, than I am by what happens in that time. I can't always determine what happens in that space and time, but I can commit the space and time for it to happen. And I have found, for somebody who resisted the commitment for so long, that the commitment itself seems to serve me pretty well in a way that I didn't expect. So that's phase one of that for me. That's what this 11th step has, my approach to that has been a little bit. I want to tell one more aspect of this 11th step and then give it back to Chris. It talks about the fact that if I stay engaged in this prayer and meditation, if I constantly throughout the day remind myself many times each day, thy will, not mine, be done. If when I am agitated or doubtful, I pause and ask for the right thought or direction. And I'll stop here. How many times in your meeting do you hear somebody bring up this part of the 11th step? Boy, when agitated, we pause. And they almost always reference the agitated and hardly ever reference the doubtful. Because we're hardly ever doubtful. We're often agitated. And, but I have to stop and make sure I fold both of those in there and say, am I many times each day reminding myself? Am I pausing and saying, oh man, God, what about now? Just reminding myself to invite God into the circumstances of my day. But after a while, our book suggests that in the morning, if I ask, that on awakening, if I ask God to divorce my thinking from selfish, self-seeking, dishonest motives, if that's out of the way, I see the world different. So that's what I'm saying. God, divorce my thinking. Make sure my thinking isn't clouded by those things, by fear, by those 7 deadly sins, by pride. Make sure those things aren't coloring the way I'm seeing the world. And if it moves that out of the way, it says my thought life will be placed on a higher plane. And it even says that I will begin to get this intuitive thought, and that I begin to rely upon. Now that's scary. It follows up by saying I'm going to make some big mistakes doing it. But the story I tell connected to this, and again, some of you've heard it, but I was headed up to Marty's part of the world about 15 years ago, going to the Ontario Regional Conference. And man, I had a new suit and a big head. I couldn't wait to go. I was excited, and this was a big deal for me. And I got to the airport in Nashville to get on the plane that was going to fly to Detroit and connect to Toronto for this, what I considered this big important thing that made me important. And, so I go to the gate area in Nashville, and there's a young woman really holding, an infant, and the mother was just sobbing inconsolably. And I see this. She's talking to the gate agent, and I see this, but we go on board. It was a small regional jet, whatever that has, 50, 60 people on it. And we get on, and the flight attendant comes on the plane. Every seat is filled. And she comes on the plane and she says, this woman's brother has been critically injured in a car accident in Detroit, and she's trying to get to his bedside in the hospital. Would anyone be willing to give up their seat? Well, intuitively, I knew the right thing to do was give up my seat. I mean, immediately I knew that I needed to give up my seat, but I started thinking. My mind got involved, and it was clouded by pride. It was clouded by fear. And as I thought about it, I thought, well, wait a minute. These people invited me. They paid for this ticket. If I don't take this flight, I won't be there in time to do what they invited me to do. My God, if I don't get to Toronto, all of AA in Canada could crumble if they don't get to hear my talk. And, so, you know, and as I'm thinking about it, pretty soon they closed the door. Nobody gave up their seat, and we took off to Detroit. Later that night, I'm standing up on this stage in front of, I don't know, was it Marty, a couple of thousand people, 2,500 people, giving a talk, talking about spiritual principles, having missed an opportunity to practice a spiritual principle, giving a talk knowing that the guy they thought they invited would have given up his seat on that airplane. And man, it just crushed me. And I made a decision then, and I've done pretty good with this decision. Since then, I've decided to listen to the intuitive voice. I think I make as many mistakes as I made before, but if I'm going to make the mistake today, I'm going to make it listening to the intuitive voice. And it makes me listen more closely when I make mistakes, because again, I will confuse God's voice for, you know, my will for God's voice sometimes. But that's okay. That's going to happen on either side of that equation. I'm going to make mistakes, and I've decided to err on the side of trying to trust that intuitive voice, because when I am, intuition implies that it's not of me. It's not of my brain. It is from somewhere else. And that's why we want to get the channel clear. That's why that prayer and meditation is to get me out of the way, so that intuition will present itself in an authentic way, and those choices will be made on the truth rather than some fuzzy version of it I give myself. So, Chris, I'll give it back to you, my friend.
Thank you, Steve. So early on in my experience with Alcoholics Anonymous, I was not a big prayer. So my sponsor was kind of encouraging me a little bit along the way. And when he finally got me to start to do morning and evening prayers, here's how he locked me in. He said, Chris, some days you're going to pray, some days you're not going to pray. I know you. So the one thing I want you to do is I want you to pay attention to how the days go when you pray and how the days go when you don't pray. And within 3 or 4 weeks, I've had a prayer discipline ever since, 30 some years. Meditation, I was more confused about. And my perception of what meditation was colored by a lot of Eastern meditative techniques. I started to read books on meditation. I started to read a lot of books on centering prayer, and really what all that stuff did was give me a real good vocabulary. What really helped me was when I actually sat and meditated. Like so much other stuff in Alcoholics Anonymous, I've always wanted to figure it out. I've always needed to know why. Why do I need to do this? And the thing that was more transformative than anything else for me was just taking the action. Whether I'm good at meditating or not, whether I'm going to struggle with meditation or not, how about giving it a shot? And I absolutely adore my meditative times now. And it's not just upon awakening, and it's not just in the evening. It's whenever I get an opportunity to do that. This realm of the spirit that the book talks about is really a comforting place to be. Now, the basic disciplines in step 11. When we retire at night, it gives us a number of instructions. Constructively reviewing our day, look for manifestations of self and how they've screwed you up, and try to take action. Upon awakening is very cool. It asks me to to look at what's coming up today. What am I going to be doing? Is there going to be any challenges? Do I need to prepare for anything? Is there anything that I need to get done? Is there anybody I need to talk to? Do I owe any of my sponsees a call? It's all constructive stuff. They say, an unexamined life is not worth living. And I'll say for an alcoholic, an unexamined life is difficult to live for an alcoholic. So this examination, the questions that they ask us to be aware of and awake to, I find are really, really powerful. There's some other paragraphs in here that really talk about the morning quiet time. In the early Oxford group, it's kind of important to understand this text, what they were doing in the Oxford group as this book was being written. And they all had morning quiet time, and they all got together to do it. It was an Oxford group practice, and it was a family practice, and everyone would engage in this as part of being an Oxford grouper. And I think Bill took what he thought would fit for the alcoholic and left some of the other Oxford group practices aside, and I'm grateful for that today. But they saw it as absolutely essential. This beginning the day with God brought into everything. Brought into your operational methodology, and I've got to tell you that I don't go a day without doing this stuff. It would be weird. I'd feel really, really weird. As we go through the day, Steve was talking about this. We pause when agitated or doubtful and ask for the right thought or action. We are no longer running the show, and this is a reference all the way back to our lives are unmanageable. We need a new manager. We're not running the show ourselves. We're trying to, we're trying to practice principles within our behavior. We're trying to look for guidance from God on ways to act. It's just a whole different setup as far as how I live my life. Now, I've said this before, I'll say it again. A good thing is no one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to any of these principles. I'm glad we don't get picked off because we're not perfect. There wouldn't be very many of us left. But a willingness and a commitment to engage in this stuff, I think is all that's needed. There's always great promises when you're doing action steps. It says we're in much less danger of excitement, fear, anger, worry, self-pity, or foolish decisions, which I'm okay with that. A reduction in those things is okay with me. We become much more efficient. And I'll tell you, that's absolutely true. This one kind of eluded me for a while, but the amount of stuff I get done in a month is extraordinary. And it's not like because I'm working hard, because I'm not. It's just I'm more efficient in the things that I do. I don't tire so easily because I'm not burning up energy foolishly. We alcoholics are undisciplined, so we let God discipline us in the simple way we just outlined. Now step 11, there's the instructions in this book, but I also believe that there's a life to this prayer and meditation. There's a life to this guidance. There's a life to this world of the spirit. And I believe we can embrace many, many different faiths, many different philosophies, many different practices. It's recommended that we go out and ask some priests, ministers, or rabbis for some good books. I'm a huge reader. I love reading. But this world of the spirit, another mystical reference. This world of the spirit is such a cool place to be. It's such a cool thing to engage in. You know, it's enormously impacted the quality of my life. There's less turbulence. There's less resistance in my life. And amazingly, a lot of the things that used to really drive me crazy either don't drive me crazy or I'm not inviting them into my life. You know what I mean? So this really is some cool stuff. And, I'm just going to touch a little bit on step 12, Steve, then I'm going to turn it over to you. I'll do like a paragraph here. Practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. So I think the whole first 11 steps are building an efficient working with others guy. Like now I've got something to carry to somebody. In the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous, I used to drive people to treatment, drive people to meetings, make coffee. I did all kinds of stuff because I was told to be of service. And that really is allowing the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, to be there, to supporting the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. But to be able to carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, I believe I need experience. I need to have gone through these steps, although imperfectly, maybe gone through these steps so that I've had an awakening and I can talk about that awakening as a solution to alcoholism to somebody I'm trying to help. It works when other activities fail. Like what are other activities? How about just going to meetings? You know what I mean? How about using your willpower? How about antabuse? I mean, there's a million different ways that I could try not to drink, and I did try them. But working with others is something. One of the best sayings that people started to say recently, and I wholeheartedly agree with it. You used to hear all the time, you got to give it away to keep it. Well, now you're starting to hear, you got to give it away to get it. And I really believe that's true because when I started working with other alcoholics, you know what? I was a card-carrying member in good standing all the way in alcoholic in Alcoholics Anonymous. And there was something about that particular effort that I was making that locked me in. You know what I mean? It just locked me into this whole thing. And I've been continuously sponsoring people, since I think it was like October, 1990. I've consistently been sponsoring people and consistently been sponsored. So, you can help when no one else can because we could talk to an alcoholic and the alcoholic's going to know we're telling the truth. 1 million people would talk to me about my drinking and they just, from a place of shame or a place of, legal consequences or I'm going to get thrown out of school or whatever. But when an alcoholic talks to me, I know they've been where I've been. And maybe they're in a different place right now. And I'm curious about that. How did you get better? And it makes us uniquely useful. And with that, I'm gonna bounce it back to my friend Steve.
Thanks, Chris. Great stuff. You said that you talked about you got to give it away to keep it, and then got to give it away to get it. And my friend Bill C. Out in Torrance, California, says if you don't give it away, you never got it. And I think that's probably pretty accurate too. If I'm not giving it away, I really haven't gotten it. because that is the end game. You know, it's not lost on me that in the 12 and 12, the first line of the 12 steps says the joy of living is the theme of AA's 12th step. And I think the implication there is that quite, counterintuitively, it is by helping others, it is by giving that we get. You know, we've been talking about that ever since we showed up at AA. But I spent all of my time before getting to Alcoholics Anonymous, not consciously, but all of my time trying to be self-satisfied, trying to satiate self in some way, and trying to, whether that was relationships or you know, career or whatever I thought was going to give me what was missing. And it was always external in some way, and usually about getting you to tell me I was okay. But it was still me trying to get something for me, and there just doesn't seem to be enough for me. Self can't be satiated by self. But conversely, when I finally surrender and begin to try to be of use to other people, I find I get what I was looking for all along. You know, the 12th step, when we get to it, and it says that having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and practice these principles in all our affairs. That's a declaration with two calls to action, right? That having had a spiritual awakening declares that I have arrived at the 12th step, having had this spiritual awakening. And having had it, I am now called to action. I am called to action to carry this message and to practice these principles. I'm now ready. Now we're really in the game. Now it's go out and be engaged in life. And so, if I'm going to carry this message to other alcoholics, what is the message I carry? And today, you know, we do it a lot of different ways. We do it the way that Chris and I did over the weekend, and are kind of putting a button on here, a bow on at the end of this tonight. But the real message that I carry is that I've had a spiritual awakening, and it was the result of these steps. And then I share with you individually or collectively my experience with the steps. And different people, that sounds different coming from different people. Thank goodness that the same message comes wrapped in a lot of different packages. And, but at its core, the message is the same. I have a spiritual awakening. Here's how I did it. Here are the steps I took. Here's my experience with those steps. That's how we're working with others. That's what we're doing. I can't tell somebody how to do something I haven't done. Well, that's not true. I can, because I have. I can pretend I did something, but I'm not very effective with that, you know. And I said in the 10th step that growing in understanding and effectiveness was, you know, now where I'm headed, that's now my mission. So, this 12th step has me now, you know, working with others, carrying the message, telling the good news, testifying in a sense. But it is all about my experience. Not, you know, it says earlier in the book that if you're an alcoholic that wants to get over it, you may already be asking, what do I have to do? And it goes on to say what I think are two critical things that bolster up what we've said here in the 12th step. It says that's exactly what this book is about. We will tell you what we have done. So the book has the message, the program of recovery that was written in there. I tell you what I have done. I got the cookbook, and I'm going to show you how I prepared the meal. And somebody else might come at it a little bit differently. But that's this chance that we get, and we're given some kind of do's and don'ts along the way in working with others. And you know, I have to tell you that, and I bet I'm not unlike a lot of people on here that have been sober for a while. but maybe I was probably a little more radical than some of you. At about 6 years sober, I was gifted to understand Alcoholics Anonymous at a level that perhaps no other human being understood AA. I not only read the book, I understood the book. I not only read what Bill wrote down, I know what Bill meant to say. And I went through a Pentecostal stage. And look, I don't ever dampen somebody who's going through their Pentecostal stage, because I think a lot of times if you're going to make a mistake, that's not a bad one to make. But I was kind of harsh. I was harsh for a while. And over the years, as I read the chapter Working with Others, it is a gentle chapter. It is a gentle chapter that gives me and others room to find their way. It's a gentle chapter that doesn't have me beating people up. It's a chapter that says that never talk down to an alcoholic from any moral or spiritual hilltop. You know, I have done some of my worst damage when I've been properly armed with the facts and had the moral high ground. But self was in charge. I had lost the third step aspect of this, and I was running the show. So the information's right, but you know, when Chris talked a minute ago about the 11th step being more than the information that's on the page, there's an experience. We're here to have an experience, not an academic exercise, not to pass the test, not to get a master's degree in Alcoholics Anonymous, but to have a spiritual experience that frees me up to live in the world in a way that I can't do it when I'm living on self-will alone. And so it's gentle. It says that if he's not interested in my solution or expects me to act only as a banker or for his financial difficulties, I may have to drop him. That doesn't mean I have to finger wag him. It doesn't mean I have to beat him up. I go, you know what, dude, that's not what I'm about. That's not the role I'm here to play. So that's not what we're going to talk about. If you're not interested in this other thing that I bring, my experience with the 12 steps, that's okay, but that's what I'm bringing to this relationship. And, I can tell you, when I got my first sponsor, Frank, he spent the first 20 minutes after I asked him to be my sponsor telling me what he wasn't going to do. It was a long list of stuff he wasn't going to do. And so, I don't usually lead with that, but, I always remember Frank doing it. And it says some stuff that we do. And it says that we tell him about Alcoholics Anonymous, him or her. Let me tell you a little bit about AA. Man, have you ever taken somebody to their first meeting? What a cool deal that is. Now, when somebody wanders into their first meeting, I don't know about you guys, but I sometimes hope I find them before they go in, because they don't know what they're in for. You go into some of the groups that I go to and you identify yourself at being at your first meeting. Man, we're going to talk at you for the hour. We're coming at you. And I'll tell a new guy or woman coming to their first meeting, I said, look, come on in here. Here's what's about to happen. At some point, somebody's going to ask, is anybody at their first meeting? You can say yes or not say anything. You can sit quietly. You don't have to do a thing. At the end of the meeting, if you say you're at your first meeting, at the end of the meeting, they're going to offer up a white chip. And man, they're going to stare you down waiting on you to get up for that white chip. And don't worry about it. You can get it or not get it. It's okay. Relax. Because what people told me at my first meetings were come in, sit down, relax. Relax. You don't have to do a thing to be here. And it is while I was in Alcoholics Anonymous that I learned about Alcoholics Anonymous. You made it so easy for me to leave that it made it easy for me to stay. And trust me, because if you lock the door, all I can think about is getting out. But if the door's open and I can leave any time, I'm liable to stay for a little while. Now, and it says we tell the new man exactly what happened to me. That's why we talk about our stories in Alcoholics Anonymous. I used to kid, some of you maybe have heard me say that I used to have a much more exciting story than the one I have today. It wasn't true, but it was exciting. And, but it also wasn't very useful because somehow I felt like, my story, I didn't have enough AA street cred in my story. So I needed to make some stuff up in an effort to be helpful to you. But what I know is that my story is the thing of primary value that I bring to Alcoholics Anonymous or the next man or woman that I'm talking to. And my story is not going to resonate with everyone, which is why we all tell our stories. At a certain point, we tell them over coffee. We tell them at our home group. We tell them in 3-minute snippets when we share in a discussion meeting. We tell them from the podium, but we tell the new man exactly what happened to me. And that's going to land where it's supposed to land, and your story will land where it's supposed to land. So that has been, and it takes the pressure off of it to just tell about me. Here's what happened. That's not a big deal. Here's my story. And I think that's important. It says if he doesn't want to stop drinking, don't waste your time trying to persuade. Now, we've all got friends and people we care about that we have spent a lot of time trying to persuade them. And I get that because I love them and care about them. But this is not saying we don't care. This isn't kind of that dismissive. Hey, dude, if you're not interested in this, then you need to go do some more drinking. It just says, don't waste that energy. I have zeroed in on a guy that I was going to help and walked by a dozen other people that wanted help while I'm trying to force feed a guy who is uninterested. And in general, I'm just going to try to find those who are interested in getting sober. And then comes after all of this talk about working with others, when I get to the 12 and 12, it says, now comes the toughest question yet. I'm thinking, are you kidding me, man? Dude, I've been working my ass off here in AA. I've done some hard stuff. I've gotten all the way back here. I've been working with others, and now you're saying here's the toughest question yet. What about the practice of these principles in all my affairs? What about my family life? What about my work life? What about as a parent? What about as a husband? Whoa. Now the rubber's meeting the road. Can you practice these principles in all your affairs? And what are the principles? Chris told us when we got started on Friday night, Chris said that AA's 12 steps are a group of principles, spiritual in their nature, if practiced as a way of life, will expel the compulsion to drink and enable the sufferer to live a life that's happily and usefully whole. So the principles I'm practicing are the 12 steps now in my daily life. Now embedded, we have all seen a full scope of those. Everybody here, I know, because we're preaching to the choir, somewhere in your AA file, you've got that list that has the principle next to the step, right? First step, is it? Oh, honesty. Second step, open-mindedness. Nope. On this list, second step is will. Everybody's got it, and they're different. Here's what I will tell you. I don't think you can put a wrong spiritual principle next to one of those steps. They all fit, all of them. This isn't linear. This is a spiritual program. This is a stew that all mixes in together. It's all okay. But the 12 steps themselves are principles. So now am I going to practice turning my will and my life over to the care of God? Am I going to practice this ongoing self-examination in all my affairs? Am I going to practice this ongoing restitution and admission of wrongs? Am I going to regularly go back to God and say, man, take this shortcoming. It's getting in my way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Am I going to go through that day in the 10th step? And am I going to keep trying to connect with God? Am I going to keep working with others? Am I going to be engaged on this and an ongoing? I love what Chris said. Am I going to be consistent? Am I going to work AA on Tuesdays and Thursdays? My attendance sometimes looks like that. But see, we so often confuse meeting attendance with my engagement in my recovery. Meeting attendance is critically important, but it is not the limit to the engagement in my recovery. I have guys that I sponsor that travel a lot, whose life circumstances don't allow them to make 4 or 5 meetings a week. And if we're not careful, some of us folks will make them feel like they're not working a good program. Look, if you're a single mother that's got a job and 2 kids and are going to that job and raising those kids and getting to 2 meetings a week and staying sober, and you're practicing these principles in your daily living, man, that's hero status stuff. The people, guys like me and Chris, you know, we get to run around because, you know, first of all, I'm probably being irresponsible in some area of my life. But you know what I mean? People that are making this work, that is, the podium guys are certainly not better AA members. And it just doing that, being in the grind day to day, that's the real stuff. And I just have so much respect for people that are doing that. And then I asked myself, I went to my sponsor, Frank. You know, I was about 6 months sober. And I said, Frank, I think practicing these principles in all my affairs is putting me at a competitive disadvantage in the marketplace. Said, I'm not sure everybody understands that these are the rules we're playing by. And he said, well, Steve, he said, if you're asking me if you're gonna not be able to close a particular deal or get a piece of business because you won't entertain in a certain way, or you won't turn a blind eye, or you won't shave a corner. He said, absolutely, anecdotally, you're going to not get particular pieces of business in what I was doing. He said, and he didn't promise me that I was going to be, you know, president of a Fortune 500 company. But he said, but if you will consistently, to use Chris's term again, says, if you will consistently live by these principles, this way of life, he said, you have no idea the number of people who have quietly chosen not to do business with you. He said, it's probably not even about your drinking. Some are about your drinking, but other folks just go, hey, it's just not my kind of guy. You're just putting off a vibe that doesn't attract them. He says, if you will commit to this over time, if you'll play the long game, and that's what we do in AA, we play the long game. He says, the people that need to be drawn to you will be drawn to you. And that's been my experience. I'm here 32 years later. I am certainly not president of a Fortune 500 company, but I continue to be able to keep my bills paid and live a life that I'm happy with, and I'm able to sleep 8 hours a night without having done anything that I am ashamed of or embarrassed about or have or has ethical challenges. And if I screw up in one of those areas, then I got a 10th step to clean it up with, and a sponsor to talk to about it, and then make that right. So we just get here, this joy of living. We are given this opportunity at the 12th step. You know, it is at the end of the chapter in the 12 and 12 on the 12th step that it gives me some information that I've taken to heart, and that's what I'll close with and give it back to Chris. It gives a whole list, a run-on sentence of things. It's the longest sentence in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I can't repeat them all, but it talks about, you know, problems well accepted or solved with God's help. It talks about love given being surely returned. It talks about not having to be especially distinguished amongst my fellows. It talks about a whole host of wonderful gifts. And it said, these are the permanent and legitimate satisfactions of right living. Permanent and legitimate satisfactions, which implies, and correctly so in my part, that I have unknowingly, unconsciously, being spiritually asleep, spent all my time seeking the illegitimate gifts of life. Not permanent and legitimate, but temporary and illegitimate. I'll use this analogy, and I love a donut. I mean, I love a donut. But every time I eat a donut, I am enjoying, every bite of that donut I enjoy. And the moment that donut is gone, I go, God damn it, I wish I hadn't eaten that donut. Every time, cause I go, now the donut's gone. The pleasure's gone. There's no residual value. There's no nutritional value. There's going to be a price to pay. And I traded these permanent and legitimate satisfactions for a temporary relief. And if you think about it, I did that with a drink and a drug so many times that I'm unwilling to feel uncomfortable for a little while. And I will trade this life that I have for a moment of seeming relief. But today I want to seek the permanent and legitimate satisfactions of right living. And then it says true ambition isn't what we thought it was. See, true ambition isn't what I thought it was. Those things that I was aiming at, what I was ambitious about. True ambition isn't what we thought it was. True ambition is the sincere desire to live usefully and walk humbly under the grace of God. Now, that is what I begin to see that I'm really looking for in this world. And it took all the way from step 1 to the very end of step 12 for me to get even a glimpse of that. And that is what provides me the permanent and legitimate satisfactions to live humbly, live usefully under the grace of God. Thank you guys so much for having me again tonight. It was great to be back with everyone. Chris, pick it up, buddy. Take us home.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you. In this chapter, that was terrific. In this chapter, there's a lot of guidance. There's a lot of instructional material in this chapter for working with others. There's on the first visit, the second visit, just speak to them about alcoholism, try to become convinced that they're alcoholic like you. And then it says, tell them exactly what happened to you. Show the spiritual feature freely. And then it talks about how you are to describe the changes in you, the spiritual awakening through the steps, the changes. And I think this is such good guidance. Early on in Alcoholics Anonymous, there was a lot of confusion in my life. I wanted to help. I felt like I needed to help people right out of the gate. And looking back on it, what I was doing was I was encouraging people to stay sober. This book is explaining to us that you can walk hand in hand with somebody into recovery. So I think I think there's a time and a place to help people stay sober. I love the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm no longer the Pentecostal banging the big book guy. Don't get me wrong, I try to carry a message of depth and weight. But when I'm in an AA meeting, I'm inclusive. I mean, look, it takes some people, it takes a certain amount of time, maybe a certain amount of pain, to get them to a point where they're going to engage in a serious recovery process. We need to allow them that time. But if you're going to be asking me to work with you, if I'm going to have one-on-one time with you, if you're going to ask me to sponsor you, what I'll usually do is I'll sit down and I'll go over a lot of material that's in this chapter. If I'm going to ask you to go to any lengths, I want to offer you the dignity of understanding what any lengths is. If you're going to work with me, these are the things that we're going to do. And not everybody that asks me to sponsor them gets through the 12 steps, and that's fine too. I don't think I've ever fired anybody. I think what happens is when I continue to encourage certain spiritual exercises that are part of our 12 steps, and someone is balking or someone is not moving forward, they've come to the conclusion that this particular step or this particular exercise is not going to be necessary in their case. I can't be the person convincing them of that. Alcohol sometimes has to be. Maybe they don't need to go through the steps. There's a lot of people that show up in Alcoholics Anonymous that still have what we would describe as power. And I'm one of these all are welcome guys, a singleness of purpose, but I can't read your mind. I don't know. I'm not going to make a judgment on your alcoholism. But if I'm working with you, I'm going to continue to encourage these things. As far as practicing the principles in all my affairs, never did a perfect job with it. And I'm glad that Alcoholics Anonymous isn't about making us perfect, because I don't know about anybody else. I don't even like perfect people. You ever have a perfect person come over your house and make you look bad? Why aren't you more like Henry next door? He's in law school, screw Henry. So I've never been a big fan of perfect, but certainly it's helped me to become useful. So when I showed up in Alcoholics Anonymous, I was an electrician. I was like a bad electrician. Yeah, like I would blow stuff up. I would electrocute myself on a daily basis. It was just the wrong career for somebody that shook like crazy, and always was hungover. So I get sober and I start, I plodded my way into the practice of the principles. It wasn't like switching a light switch. It slowly dawned on me that this stuff is in my best interest. But over the course of time, I became more honest. And I became more dependable. And the things that people that are hiring you and paying you are looking for in an employee. And I started to get jobs, just better. Every job I got was a better job. I went from a really bad electrician to someone who was running a large department in pharmaceutical manufacturing and research and development sites. Always waiting for them to figure out the enormity of the mistake they made putting me in charge. But again, kind of intuitively realizing I wouldn't be in that job if I couldn't handle it. But there's always that self-esteem stuff, and that's remarkable to me. I was always the family member that you didn't want around. So when I first got sober, I remember telling my sponsor, I come from a family. We're not real close. Phil, we're really not really a close family. We eat in different rooms, at Thanksgiving, and I tell them all these stories. And I'm sober a while, and I start to realize that my family goes on vacation with each other, all of them. They drive around the country. They go to Europe. They just don't bring me. You know what I mean? And so slowly, it takes family sometimes a longer time than it takes other people. But, slowly I started to become like the go-to guy for problems or help. Or, hey, Chris, what do you, I've got this challenge, what do you think? And believe me, that was, not what they were doing in the 80s. So the practice of these principles becomes practical in my life to improve my quality of life. It really does. I want to end with this. So I'm working with a sponsor now, and I love him to death. He's, ridiculously spiritual and into all kinds of stuff, had all kinds of teachers. Those are the kind of guys I like. And he gave me 3 practices. He gave me 3 very, very simple practices. And when he gave them to me, I thought they were stupid. Like I normally think, this stuff is stupid until I try it and I actually see the benefit of it. Pay the money back? That's stupid. But you actually do it, and then now you get it. You learn things in hindsight. So he gave me basically 3 spiritual practices, and they're very, very simple. One of them was, Chris, every time you're conscious of it, tell yourself what you're doing. I'm like, what do you mean by that? He goes, well, just say, I am walking out to the car. I am getting in the car. I am driving to the store. Just say that. And I'm like, all right. So I start doing it. And the benefit of this particular exercise is it keeps me present. It keeps me in the now. Like, what am I doing now? And it's a very, very simple thing, and it changed the way I looked at a lot of things. Another exercise he gave me, because I was talking to him about some challenge, like some stupid thing, like, my wife wants me to do all this stuff. I'm real bad at it, blah, 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 blah. He goes, well, Chris, do what I do. And I go, what's that? He goes, ask God for help. So I go, give me an example. He goes, well, all right, I'm making my bed. God help me make my bed. He works out on a horse farm. So he's got, God help me go get water for the horses. Help me go get hay for the horses. Just is try to be aware and try to ask God for help. And that sounded stupid, but I started to do it. And the benefit of that was it was an exercise in the consciousness of the presence of God. And so I'm God conscious more than I used to be. And then he gave me a third exercise, and I love this one. He goes, Chris, every time you're outside and every time you become conscious of it, look up. I'm like, yeah, and what else? He goes, no, just look up. And so I started doing it. And where it led me was I became aware that, I'm a biological being having a spiritual awakening on this planet, in the middle of God's creation, in the middle of God's playground. And it was an exercise in gratitude. Just every time I looked up, I was grateful for having this opportunity of a life with all of you, and so those are three exercises that I play around with. Remember, the spiritual life is broad, roomy, and all inclusive, and we find our own way, and we own our own spiritual journey, and we own our own consciousness of the presence of God in relationship with God. And that's all I have. I absolutely loved the Wilson House. I loved the Zoom. Steve, again, thank you. Malcolm, again, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here today.
Thank you for listening to Sober Sunrise. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give it a thumbs up as it will help share the message. Until next time, have a great day.